Thanks very much to the organizers, and particularly Pablo, for inviting me to this conference. With this presentation, I'll try and call attention to the paradox of digital sustainability, and in the process address two other routes we could follow. So it's almost common knowledge now. The complexity and challenges of preserving digital heritage can be summarized as follows. Reading all the code and software can be difficult. The economy of obsolete technology and the reliance on third, often commercial parties, makes it hard to access hardware and software over time. Similarly, perhaps one thing is available, yet its embedding in larger networks and webs of relations poses additional challenges, with the consequences that maintenance of software and hardware can be very time-consuming and expensive. As well, with different people working on a project simultaneously and even over time, changes to the work will start to appear. Moreover, artworks can evolve into other versions, which makes it hard to define what an artwork is or consists of in a digital environment. So impermanence, variability, and fragility are the defining conditions when talking about digital art. Nevertheless, many solutions appeared in the last 10 to 15 years, from migration to emulation, fertilization, and documentation. All kinds of tools and projects are being set up to prolong the functioning of digital art. While most of the preservation efforts work well, in many cases, changes to the content, aesthetics, and information happen. Consequently, there are many discussions about the acceptable amount of change. But something else happens, which is less discussed. While the artworks need some sort of new environment or adjustments to continue to function, the additional technical environment also needs to be updated. As a consequence, increasingly we see new tools and mechanisms popping up which require also additional specific knowledge and expertise. In short, this technical landscape is proliferating to the point where it is at times hard to know what is kept alive. Is it the artwork or the new layers around the artwork to keep it functioning? In other words, we've entered an enduring technical rat race in which relatively small and often simple artworks can grow quickly into a large technical infrastructure, which soon become a dense forest of different hardware, software, and people. Now, burdened by this continuous technical change, some artists decided to delete their projects. For instance, in 2011, Slovenian net art pioneer Igor Strohmayer ritually deleted a number of his classical net artworks that were produced between 1996 and 27. They didn't look the same anymore because settings had changed and the web had been updated. Strohmayer preferred deletion to aesthetic loss and technical malfunction. Now, it's not my aim today to go this far, and nor does Strohmayer for that matter, as I will show in a minute. But for now, I would like to raise awareness of the preservation limits. The short lifespan of many digital art projects becomes unsustainable and questionable when considering its preservation. First of all, on the level of the content, with every upgrade, migration, fertilization, or emulation, form and content may change. Moreover, the media environment in which these projects exist further changes their aesthetic or functioning. Secondly, the organizational structure. New knowledge and expertise are required to guide and solve the next technical challenge. And third, the enduring technical rat race is not sustainable in an ecological sense because these practices have high energetic costs, which results in a significant carbon footprint of digital art projects. Now, these challenges also bring out the paradox of digital sustainability. On the one hand, there is a need to keep our digital heritage safe for future research, culture, memory, or evidence. And on the other hand, the continuing need to update technical tools and methods is an increasing burden on organizational infrastructures and methods, as well as on the ecological environment. Now, the ecological impact is not lost on most people, and there is also a growing awareness in digital heritage organizations and museums. Looking at the literature about digital sustainability in relation to ecological challenges in the last years has shown an impressive increase in how the sustainability challenge is tackled. For instance, by improving gallery spaces, minimizing waste, and implementing energy management. As well, many organizations set their environmental goals by directing their attention to financial and staffing resources. While these are all good efforts to reduce the ecological footprint, when considering sustainability as a problem of governance, just as much as a problem of technical and environmental constraints, can create space to move beyond the economic or quantifiable benchmarking of sustainability and address another potential area in which digital preservation can become more sustainable. So my current research starts by acknowledging this inherent contradiction in digital sustainability, and in turn, to think about a more sustainable approach for the future of digital preservation, which is based on a deep understanding of the complex infrastructures in which these artworks prosper, as well as the integration of community networks and living memory in institutional practices. In such a scenario, collaborative networks form the basis for a more enduring infrastructure, and learning from methods of living memory can reduce the sole emphasis on technical development. Now, a practice that shows what this could mean is the work 1 terabyte of kilobyte H by Olia Lialina and Dragan Espenschied. In 2010, they downloaded the torrent files of the GeoCities archive. Now, GeoCities was a free web hosting service founded in July 1995, and it soon emerged as one of the most popular and inhabited places on the web, and remained so until the late 90s. At the peak of the dot-com fever in January 1999, Yahoo bought GeoCities. But rather quickly, it became synonymous with old-fashioned aesthetics and basically bad taste. After continuous loss of revenue in April 29, Yahoo decided that it was shutting down GeoCities in 6 months. In this period, the archive team managed to rescue almost 1 terabyte of GeoCities pages in 6 months and helped by about 100 volunteers. On the first anniversary of GeoCities closing, the archive team released a torrent file archive of about 641 gigabytes, consisting of approximately 1.2 million accounts. As a symbol of the amateur web, Olia and Dragan saw the historical, social, and cultural potential and came up with the idea to redistribute the GeoCities homepages through the net. This was done in several ways. An automated Tumblr site that updates every 20 minutes, and which is now still an ever-growing series of front-page screen captures. And the screen captures with the most reposts and likes from their Tumblr followers are then represented with their new tags on their dedicated research page, 1 terabyte of kilobyte H. And again, they get distributed through Twitter. So the GeoCities archives became a spiral in which Olia and Dragan reflect on the Tumblr archive of the torrent archive of the GeoCities archive. People reblog, retweet, like, and save it, and it just keeps going on. Through liking, sharing, and redistribution, GeoCities keeps circulating, popping up in new contexts. The project provides a means of archiving over 500,000 screenshots of homepages, and the results of those homepages save much of the humor that still drives online culture. Rather than purely collecting the material for the purpose of preservation, the project became about questioning what archive could mean in the context of making work accessible. As described by Dragan, the form was explicitly chosen as a curatorial and conservation method. As he says, digital culture is mass culture, and it is also more about practices than objects. In order for artifacts to survive culturally, they need to become useful again in contemporary digital culture. Content that is isolated, decontextualized, and shuffled around in databases of social networking sites is the main form of communication. To be useful, an artifact has to work as a post. It has to become impartable and be brought into a format that is accepted everywhere, and that is a screenshot. So applied in a sort of generative and circulatory way, the project keeps creating new forms and interpretations, a carefully designed mass reenactment. And while the screenshots have some authenticity issues, as also acknowledged by Dragan, this is greatly outweighed by their accessibility and therefore impact. What does this say about the possibility of preserving digital art, or memory for that matter? Whereas some parts may remain intact, or at least to some level, many of these works are constantly changing and dynamic, and moreover, they are depending on the goodwill of their audience. This brings me to my next point, the value of users, as described by Kathleen Fitzpatrick. a future preservation of digital objects may be less about new tools than new socially organized systems, systems that take advantage of the number of individuals and institutions facing the same challenges and seeking the same goals. Indeed, also one of the conclusions that came out of my research in the conservation of net art, and was that these artworks are taken care of by different individuals, small organizations or groups of people with a similar aim, how to safeguard parts of the artwork. I've termed these initiatives networks of care. Now, in order for a network of care to succeed outside of an institutional framework or to become effective as a tool for transformation, it ideally has to consist of several characteristics. These can be traced by looking at how a network gives agencies to individuals, instead of answering the question of how individuals create networks. As such, a network of care is based on a transdisciplinary attitude and a combination of professionals and non-experts who manage or work on a shared project. To enable the creation and administration of a project, the transmission of information is helped by a common mode of sharing. Everyone in the group has access to all documents. Ideally, it would be an open system or a dynamic set of tools that is used and cared for, where people can add, edit, and manage information and track changes through their version control system that are made. A network should be dynamic. It should have forking possibility so that individuals can easily move and projects can be merged or split into separate, smaller or more specialized groups. Now, this is not particularly new or innovative, as we can see in many land art projects. Yet what such a network approach emphasizes is the necessity of connecting all users who are or become partly responsible for the management and accessibility of the work. In other words, if we assume that these artworks for a large part are constantly changing, we must look for ways to facilitate variability, reinterpretation, and continuous process. Interesting, looking into the conservation of performance art, Tate researchers Pip Lawson and Vivian van Saasen noted in their research that it's not a problem of non-materiality that currently represents the greatest challenge for museums in collecting performances, but of maintaining, conceived as a process of active engagements, the networks which support the work. Indeed, but moreover, what I think is important to note is that the network should be seen as inherently part of the work and not merely as facilitating the work. Seeing the network as an actor rather than a tool or method turns the questions of how individuals create a network to how networks care. Now, this notion of care is very present in conservation practice. Collection care is pretty much at the heart of conservation. Yet here I want to try to move beyond the caring for an object by following the notion of care as described by Annemarie Mol in her ethnography of healthcare, and Maria Puig de la Bella Casa, who shows how care is also always ambivalent. Both these authors see care as a practice that involves political, economic, institutional, and ethical power relations. But more importantly, care is not a matter of making well-argued individual choices. It's something that grows out of collaborative and continuing attempts to attune knowledge. Similarly, I see a network of care as a social, technical, and political construction. And to get a better understanding of the functioning of such a network, it's important to consider or speculate how it performs, how it changes, and how it can produce new forms of care. While it has the potential or may seem to disrupt the status quo, it's not merely about changing or choosing for one or the other. Rather, it's working towards a process of relation making and supporting collective learning. This kind of network of care I saw reflected in several projects. First of all, and going back to Igor Strohmeyer, 4 years ago, I received this email from Igor. I opened the links and this is what I saw. Several images and a short sound file. 2 years after that, I received another email, yet a bit more descriptive, asking me to put the files and the additional one in a safe space. asking him about his practice, Igor explained that it's a performative action. As he says, it's a kind of a cycle, a durational, perhaps never-ending online performance with a natural rhythm, being constructed, deconstructed, then reconstructed anew, but this time differently. Who knows exactly what comes afterwards, but there is certainly no end to this cycle, because every trace, every move you make has its consequences. So in a period of 4 years, from 2016 to 2020, he asked a group of people to keep safe several encrypted files, which he randomly selected from his earlier project Expunction. As I mentioned, he deleted many of his net artworks from his server, looking for other modes of distributing, sharing, and experiencing the potential of his artwork, which is now stuck and compressed in these removed files. Igor is organizing a network of guardians or caretakers around his work. Something similar happens in a network created by Martine Delm as part of her project Mouchette.org, a website that she started in 1997 and which is still very active today. An interesting part of the project is the Mouchette network, where anyone can copy and edit parts of the site and or start their own Mouchette website. As I also showed with Igor's action, creating a network around or as part of your work can be a potential way to preserve the work. But the network can also function in another way, which became apparent when Mouchette received a cease and desist letter for one of her projects, a game in which she compared her character with the one she based the narrative on, and which happened to be a rather famous French film director. Whilst the widow of the director wrote her to take any reference to the film down, other organizations came together to safeguard the project. A call was put out on NetTime with links to all kinds of other organizations that now host the game. So in conclusion, and I'm sorry for to rush over these projects, which deserve much more time and attention, a future preservation of digital objects is not only about new tools or technical developments, but much more about new socially organized communities, facilitating networks, structures, or systems between different people, professionals, makers, and users, where a joint challenge or similar goals come together. This shifts the attention from management and preservation to care and presentation. Finally, in this sense, the network also cares. Referring to shared resources and goals, the term includes social relations and negotiations that are necessary to produce and maintain a network, but which in the end are fluctuating and not fixed on a predetermined outcome. Thank you very much. And I'm very much looking forward to discussing in which I can perhaps elaborate on some of the aspects that have been coming up.